Hey everybody, Doomwake here, and we are finally done with Modern Horizons 3 spoilers, and that means it's time for a top 20 video with some honorable mentions, so more like a top 25. But before we get started, I just wanted to say I think this set looks incredible. I'm very, very excited to get to work on a lot of these cards. Most of the cards in the video you will see me play with at some point on the channel. And I just think that the set, I've been kind of down on Modern over the past maybe year or so. Haven't been playing as much. I've been focusing more on Pioneer and Standard. But I will say, this set does look like it's going to shake the entire landscape, and I'm very, very excited to see some of the decks and strategies that come out of this set. Now, let's start off with some honorable mentions, and the first one that I want to discuss is Planar Genesis. This is sort of like a new growth spiral, but it's kind of like split card, growth spiral, or impulse. The problem with growth spiral is early on, you don't have a land in hand, you draw a card off the growth spiral, you don't hit a land. So it's just 2-mana cantrip in that regard. What's nice about Planar Genesis is early on, you get to dig 4 deep to make it more likely that you find the land, and then later on, when you don't need the extra land, you get to dig 4 deep to find your scape shift. So I think this is, if there is some sort of blue-based scape shift deck with, I'm trying to think of the old school ones with Remand, Cryptic Command. I don't know if we're going to go towards that route, but if there is some kind of scape shift adjacent deck, I'm sure this card, like I said, is a good enough upgrade to Growth Spiral, and I think has some merit and is at least worth discussing. Another card that I want to pull up on your screen here, honorable mention number 2, is Tune the Narrative. I haven't really heard a lot of people talking about this card. Now, NRG the first time around was kind of a disaster, right? And this was for a standard format. Now, obviously, Modern, much higher power level than your average standard format. And the card that I'm comparing this to is Attune with Aether, which is a card that was banned in Standard. Now, I'm not trying to say that this card's going to get banned in Modern, because it's not. But what I am trying to say is that for decks that have enough energy payoffs, if you can convert 2 energy into a cardboard material, like a cardboard worth of card, just anything, if you can take that 2 energy and make it into something, this is pretty damn close to just 1 blue mana, draw 2 cards. Now, that maybe that's an exaggeration, but what's really nice about this is it curves very nicely into some of the other energy payoffs that we may or may not see in this video. And that's kind of what I like about it. You get to make your Galvanic Discharge a little bit bigger. You get to make your Amped Raptor a little bit better. Those are kind of the 2 biggest energy payoffs. There's maybe a couple of other fringe ones. But yeah, just all I'm saying is keep an eye out for this one. I would not be surprised if this was a centerpiece of one of those energy decks. Next card we have, honorable mention number 3, Guide of Souls. This is kind of like the new Soul Sister adjacent card. It's, the 1/2, whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life, get an energy. I don't think the second ability is going to come up super often, because the way that the decks that I envision this card going into are combo decks, where there's an energy Allurin adjacent card. Again, spoiler alert, we might talk about that card. And I think this card is going to be a centerpiece of those decks, because every time you play a creature, you get an energy, which lets you cast another creature for free. So it just kind of goes completely off with the Allurin. And also keep in mind, if your deck wanted, like if you were a deck that was interested in playing Soul Warden, or I forget, the Soul's Attendant I think is the other one, like the Soul Sisters, this is just a better version of those because it doesn't die to Bowmasters. And I really do think that they put the second toughness on this card because they wanted to see play and they did not want it to die to Bowmasters. I think that is intentional. Next one we kind of hinted at a little bit earlier. This is Galvanic Discharge. This is the new red removal spell. I don't think this is going to usurp Lightning Bolt or maybe even Unholy Heat, but in the energy decks, like if you have any sort of other energy payoff, specifically Amped Raptor, I think this card has a lot of potential. To just imagine a scenario where your opponent play a Ragavan on turn 1. You Galvanic Discharge their Ragavan, you still have 2 energy left over, untap, play Amped Raptor, 2 more energy, that lets you Amped Raptor into a 4-mana card. You can just cast the One Ring on turn 2, after you've killed their creature and played a 2/1. Now, that's maybe Magical Christmas Land, but you kind of see the ceiling on this card and what it actually facilitates with the other energy cards. At a base, like even if you don't want to kill their creature, you just want energy, you can just pay 1 mana to get 3 energy, which is even still, like, assuming that you have enough stuff to do with energy, even that's not that bad of a rate. So keep an eye out for this one. Harbinger of the Seas is our last honorable mention here. I mean, this is Flood Moon. This is the 2/2 non-basic lands or islands. What I didn't kind of realize at first about this card is that it turns on your Island Walk Merfolk. I don't know how that specific interaction just kind of sailed past my head, but yes, that it makes the card even better. There's really not much else to say about this card. It's going to be a mainstay in Merfolk decks. Maybe there's other like control adjacent strategies that can adopt this in Winter Moon and just play a lot of basic lands, and I don't know what those decks would look like. Very, very good card. Didn't quite crack the top 20, but we are going to get into the top 20, starting with Phyrexian Tower. This is a reprint from Urza's Saga. To be honest with you, for some reason I thought this card was reserve list, but apparently it's not. So here it is. Yeah, tap, sack a creature, add 2 black. I know that a lot of people have this maybe a little bit higher on their lists or just talking about it in general. I do think the card is powerful, especially when you combine it with other stuff that wants to go to the graveyard. Think Bloodghast and Stitcher's Supplier are the two that come to mind. You don't really want to be pairing this with Grief, ideally. I mean, I understand you can Grief evoke and then sacrifice the Grief to this, but realistically, you'd much rather just be pairing the Grief with Not Dead after all. So I don't think this is as good in the Grief decks, but the combination of Stitcher's Supplier, Bloodghast, Chthonian Nightmare, Orcish Bowmasters, this card is phenomenal with, because you can sack the token and then maybe get another token later down the road and then sack that token. So a lot of stuff you can do with it, but I don't actually think you want to be pairing this with Grief, as weird as that sounds. But maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. Coming in at number 19, we have Tamiyo, Inquisitive Student. What I really like about this card is you can actually flip this on turn 2. Maybe you didn't know that. So you can actually go turn 1, Tamiyo, cast Mishra's Bauble, pass the turn. And you go sacrifice the Mishra's Bauble on your opponent's turn. So on your second turn, you draw a card off the bauble, that's 1. A card for your draw step is 2. Then you go play your second land, attack with Tamiyo, investigate, post-combat, sacrifice the clue. That's your third card, and then you can immediately flip Tamiyo on turn 2. And it transforms into a relatively powerful card. You're not, on turn 2, you're not going to have anything to get back with the minus anyways, so you're just going to want to plus it the first turn. I mean, maybe you can play some sort of like blue-red or blue-white deck where you're rebuying Lightning Bolts, you're rebuying Prismatic Endings, things of that nature. And then the ultimate is essentially just game over. You draw half of your library and you have no maximum hand size, so if you ever get to the ultimate, and the game will end, assuming you're not just dead on board that turn. So I kind of like this card. Just the fact that you can flip it on turn 2 and you can do it so fast makes me interested in this. I don't know what shells it would go into. Maybe like Murktide Regent, where that deck has cantrips anyways, like Consider, and maybe you want to play Consider and things like that. So yeah, maybe Murktide, maybe some sort of Blue X control deck, but I do like Tamiyo quite a bit. All right, number 18, Ocelot Pride. This is, I don't know if I should say I'm surprised that this is a mythic rare, or if I'm surprised that more people are not discussing it because it's a mythic rare. But this is 1/1 First Strike Lifelink. It's got a lot of words on it, but basically at the end step, if you gain life this turn, you make a 1/1 cat creature token. The turn that you play it, you don't actually get the token. It's a little bit awkward in that regard, but it's also very good with the card that we discussed in the honorable mention, which was the Guide of Souls, where if you play the Guide of Souls on turn 1, turn 2, you can play this, get a 1/1 token, and then from there, I don't really know if the City's Blessing is necessarily a big part of this card, or if the City's Blessing is just flavor text, but I'm also maybe thinking about it in the Asmo decks that create a lot of game objects, where you have Academy Manufactor, Cookbook, and you have a ton of ways to Urza's Saga to find more cookbooks and things like that to just generate a ton of game objects. And those decks can actually get to the City's Blessing pretty fast. But I don't know, there's a lot of words on this, and it's very, very cheap in terms of its mana cost. So I more so have this on here because if it's good, I don't want to be the only person that didn't talk about it. But I don't know. I think this card has potential. Not exactly sure where it goes now, but let me know in the comments about this one, because I have high hopes for the Pride. Number 17, Amped Raptor. I know that there are certain other content creators that are extremely high on this card. I'm not as high on it as them. Now, it's still cracking my top 20 because I think the card is powerful. I just don't think it's quite broken. And let me explain. So in the best case scenario, yes, this card is completely absurd, where you have that situation we talked about earlier. Turn 1, Galvanic Discharge your 1-drop, kill your Ragavan, 2 energy. Turn 2, cast my Raptor, 4 energy, cast the 1 ring. Like, you are going to win those games 100% of the time. It's going to be impossible to lose those games. But I think my biggest issue with Amped Raptor is the floor on it seems very, very low to me. Because in that deck, for example, you have the Galvanic Discharges. You probably have some other sort of removal spells in your deck because you need to play removal in order to interact with your opponent, or otherwise you're going to lose. So you're going to have maybe bolts, probably not heats, but you see the idea. Bolts, and then you're maybe going to have some other, like, slightly more expensive cards, because I think if you just build your entire deck with 1 and 2 drops, you're not really going to be able to compete with most of the other strategies. I mean, I guess you go like this, Ragavan, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Galvanic Discharge stuff, but I don't know. I think that the floor, what I mean by the floor is low is that if you hit a removal spell, it's not like Discover where you get to put the removal spell in your hand. You just don't get the removal spell. I guess with Galvanic Discharge, you can target itself and get the 3 energies, so that's fine, and you can bolt them. But, like, the ceiling is extremely high, but also I will caution, the floor I think is quite low on this card. So I'm maybe not as high on it as most people, but I do think that it is a good card, so don't yell at me in the comments that I'm saying the card's bad, because I do think it's good. Just not quite on that broken S tier level. Number 16, this is Wrath of the Skies. So this is kind of the new energy sweeper. It's like a not Phyrexian, what's the card that I was thinking of? Pernicious Deed-esque type effect. The one thing that I didn't realize at first is you do have to pay the mana and the energy on it. Maybe a little bit worse than my initial read. I thought this card was just pay energy and then blow up everything. Can't quite do that. But what's nice about this is it's sort of like a later game mana sink as well, where you can overpay. So, like, let's say you pay this card 3 colorless and 2 white, you get 3 energy, then you only want to blow up 1s or something, then you just get that energy in reserve. But I mostly am looking at this as an extremely potent sideboard card against decks that have a lot of 0s and 1s. So, Affinity has, Urza Sagas and Construct tokens, Hammer Time, Hardened Scales, even Amulet, where you can blow up multiple amulets with this thing for 3 mana, and also get their sagas on the way out too. I just think this is going to be one of the better sideboard cards in the format. Maybe it doesn't quite have the best home in main decks, but if you have enough energy payoffs, I certainly could see playing this in main decks as well. If you're some sort of, like, energy control deck, maybe that would be blue-white with Tune the Narrative, or perhaps red-white with Galvanic Discharge, maybe even Jeskai. Keep that in mind, and maybe there's some energy control deck, and this would certainly be a fixture of that deck. Number 15 on our list, this is Chthonian. Is it Chthonian or Chthonian? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. But this is Chthonian Nightmare, 2 mana enchantment. This is kind of the energy callback to Recurring Nightmare. I'm in love with this card. I don't have it super duper high. It is number 15 on the list, but I really, really want to build decks with this card. We talked about Phyrexian Tower with the Stitcher Supplier and Bloodghast kind of package deal utilizing the graveyard. This is an extremely potent part of that engine, to where you can, say, sacrifice your Stitcher Supplier for 2 mana, then cast this using the 2 mana. Maybe you have a mana left over to cast another supplier. You play that supplier, you sack that one, get back the other one, and then kind of, loop it from there. This card, I know you guys probably don't want to hear this, but it is extremely powerful with Grief. And the reason is, when you have this loop going with Supplier and Grief, you go Supplier, right? The Chthonian Nightmare, 3 energy. You sacrifice Supplier, get back another Supplier. 2, you only have to pay 1 energy, so you're down to 2 now. Then you can play the Nightmare again, go back up to 5. Now you have 5 energy, you sack the supplier you just got back to get back Grief, down to 1 energy, replay Nightmare up to 4, and you kind of see where this is going. So you can kind of loop Supplier and Grief, even though the Nightmare only gets 3 energy, because you're gaining the energy back from when you're sacrificing the supplier, because you only have to use 1 of the energies to get that back. So that core of those 3 cards, Supplier, Bloodghast, Grief, I don't know what the rest of it looks like. Maybe you're a scam deck. Maybe you're leaning more into the sacrifice themes with Goblin Bombardment and Gravecrawler. There's some other sacrifice payoffs in this set too, as the altar that we talked about, obviously. So yeah, I don't know if you're more of a scam or a sacrifice deck, but I'm going to be playing a lot with this card. I have a very, very big soft spot for Recurring Nightmare, especially in Cube, and I like this card a lot. Number 14 on the list, we have Eldrazi Linebreaker. This is the 3/3 trample, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you give a creature +X/+0 haste, where X is the number of Eldrazi you control. I really think that there is, with the printing of some of the cards in this set, and we'll certainly get to some of the other ones later, but I think there is going to be a good, aggressive, focused Eldrazi deck. Now, a lot of people want to talk about Ugin's Labyrinth and things like that, where you play it in more of a bigger mana deck, where you maybe go a little bit higher on the curve in Tron or bigger Eldrazi's. I really think that with the redundancy of having 8 copies of your Soul Land now, you really just want to focus on the low-end stuff. Because what was so broken about the Eldrazi deck when we had Eye of Ugin is the ability to just double spell. Now, Eye of Ugin lets you play multiple Mimics on turn 1, so you can't quite do that with Labyrinth. But imagine this curve of turn 1 Eldrazi Mimic, turn 2 Linebreaker. So Linebreaker ETBs, pumps the Mimic to a 3/3. You now have 2 3/3s. Eldrazi Linebreaker can give itself +2/+0 in haste. That means you're attacking for 8 on turn 2. That sounds really kind of insane, right, if you think about that, because when I kind of look back on the Eldrazi deck before, it was turn 1 Mimic, turn 2 Spirit Guide, Reality Smasher, attack for 10. This isn't as good as that, but it's got some vibes to it, where it seems like there's definitely something there. And then imagine that same curve where you follow it up with a Reality Smasher. You go Smasher, make the Mimic a 5/5, pump the Reality Smasher, and just go out of control. So I think there's definitely an aggressive Eldrazi deck with Mimic, and that's kind of the one that I want to focus on more. But yeah, Eldrazi Linebreaker is going to be a big part of that deck. Number 13, lucky number 13, Nethergoyf. This is the new Tarmogoyf, but it only counts your graveyards, which means I guess they can't turn it off sometimes. It's a weird one. I think this is at its best in decks that are utilizing the card types that have multiple different card types. So Tarfire, Tribal Instant. Urza Saga, Enchantment Land. Architects of Will, which some of the Delirium-based Jund Shadow decks played, Creature Artifact. And I think it's going to pair well with those cards. Maybe Traverse, maybe even you want to be going back to Traverse Shadow. So your threats, because if you guys, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a Jund Shadow deck maybe 3-4 years ago. Maybe it was 3 years ago, like right around, I think it might have been right before MH2 came out, or right around that time. But they were always missing that additional threat, right? They had Death Shadow, they had Ragavan, and sometimes they were playing like Monastery Swift, or this might have been before MH2, because I don't think they had Channeler. But sometimes they were playing like Monastery Swift Spear and things like that, but they just wanted an additional large 1-mana threat. And I think that could be this, because you kind of already wanted to be playing the Delirium stuff anyways, because you maybe have Channeler, maybe have Traverse the Ovenwald, and this works well with the Delirium stuff. And it is another large creature, which I think maybe gets you to a point where you can go back to playing TBR. That was kind of the issue, is you didn't have enough big things for Temur Battle Rage. Maybe this gets you to where you need to go for that specific archetype. Other than that, maybe Jund Saga could play this as a 1 or 2 of. You don't want to play a ton of copies, because the escape is actually pretty hefty. Like 4 types is a lot, so keep that in mind. But I like this card, and I think it will see play in those Jund decks. Kozilek's Command. This is XCC. This is number 12, by the way. This card just has a lot of utility, where I think the floor is 2 mana, kill your construct token, draw a card. That's a pretty good floor, but it also just has so much utility in so many different matchups. You can exile cards from graveyards, good against the Reanimator decks, and potentially Dredge or Oops-All spells, which may pop up due to recent printings in this set. You can exile their 1-drop and scry 1, draw 1. You can ramp with this. Like, that's kind of the best application, is just kill your 1-drop ramp for me on turn 2, because you have Soul Lands. Because both of your Soul Lands cast this card, since it is a Kindred card for the Eldrazi Temple. So yeah, big fan of this card. I think it's just got a lot of utility, and I think in basically any Eldrazi deck, this will be probably a 2 or 3 of. Maybe not a 4 of, because it is sometimes clunky, but probably at least 2 or 3 of. Number 11, Kappa. This is Kappa Cannoneer. So I initially, when I first saw this card spoiled, which was actually kind of early on, I thought it was going to be a lot higher on my list, but it turns out they decided to print a lot more good cards. So it's only number 11 here, but I do think this card is quite good and is going to be very heavily played in the affinity decks. Just because it's fairly obvious, right? It works very, very well with your cheap artifacts, which you kind of already want to play anyways because you're a Thought Monitor and Mirror Enforcer deck. The only thing that I will caution about Kappa Cannoneer is because of Ugin's Labyrinth, and this not pitching to Ugin's Labyrinth, you kind of need to play a high density of Mirror Enforcers. So you got to be a little bit careful in deck building where you have a bunch of Mirror Enforcers and a bunch of these and a bunch of Thought Monitors, and you just end up with a deck that has 24 cards that cost 7 mana and not enough actual 0 mana cards. So the deck building is going to be a little tough, but I would find myself hard pressed to say that this card is not going to see play because Ward 4 might as well just be hexproof. So the way that I read this card is just 1 mana 4/5/5 hexproof unblockable, and it just scales from there. I think this card has a lot of potential, and Affinity's back, baby. And now we're getting into the meat and potatoes, or the Eldrazi's, of the top 10. Number 10, Devourer of Destiny. This has a mana cost and power and toughness, but most of that doesn't even matter that much. You're really just going to be playing this card because in your opening hand, you can reveal it. You get 4 additional looks at a Ugin's Labyrinth or Eldrazi Temple, because presuming if your deck is built around Eldrazi, you really want your Soul in on turn 1. So you basically get 4 more looks at it, and this is a 7 mana card to pitch to Binding. In the Eldrazi decks, this is 100% going to be a shoe-in for it. I don't think you're going to ever build an Eldrazi deck without starting with this card. It's not higher on my list because it's hard to say. It's not powerful because looking at 4 extra cards is really good. Like we saw this with, it's not quite Once Upon a Time, but it's like this is the fixed version of Once Upon a Time. It makes your deck so consistent, and that's what I think is so good about this card, where, you are just going to more likely have your Soul in on turn 1, and that's pretty scary if you're increasing the likelihood of turn 2 Thought-Knots here, because that is that's a pretty good start. So yeah, Devourer of Destiny, not a ton else to say, but just going to be a shoe-in for in essentially every Eldrazi deck, and maybe even Tron as well. Speaking of shoe-in in Eldrazi decks, at number 9 here we have Thief of Existence. So this is sort of like Thought-Knot Seer, but for permanence, where you get to kill a thing with mana value 4 or less, and then when the thief dies, they draw a card. But notably, this is also only 3 mana. And also notably, it's when you cast the spell. So they're in this weird spot where maybe they want to counter your 3/4, but they don't, because if they counter your 3/4, then they just lose the permanent forever. It doesn't actually say uncounterable on the card, but it might as well be uncounterable, because if you're in a situation where you're casting this and you kill a permanent with it and they counter it, it's just a 2-for-1 straight up. And in the instance where you cast it, you kill their permanent, then they kill it and they draw a card, it's a more even exchange. Yeah, this card is extremely powerful, very versatile, can help kill just really anything. Kills Leyline of the Guild Pact, actually, hold on, no, it doesn't kill Leyline, right? Mana value 4 or less. Let me know in the comments. I don't think it does. Never mind. Okay. Well, in any case, kills Teferi, kills 1-drops, kills Amulet of Vigors, kills a lot of things. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. There is a laundry list of things the Thief of Existence kills. Very, very, very big fan of this card, specifically in that aggressive Eldrazi deck with Linebreaker. Number 8, we have Shifting Woodland. There is a cycle of these lands where they ETB untapped if you control a basic land type of a certain type. I really think this is kind of the only playable one. The rest of them, you can go look them up. I didn't put them on the list because I don't think they're worth talking about. Maybe the red one's okay, but I think this is by far and away the best one. And the reason for that is there's a couple of things that make this card very good. First of all, the ability on it, you don't have to tap the Woodland to do it. It says 4 mana, but it's actually kind of like 3 mana because you can just tap it for itself. Because on this type of effect, you would assume, under normal circumstances, that you would have to tap to activate it. Now, I think the reason they did that is because they wanted you to make it a creature, where you could pay 4 mana, make it a creature, and then attack with the Woodland. So I understand the design perspective of it, but it's just, keep that in mind. And what's so good about this card is it's not that hard to enable Delirium in Modern. You have Mishra's Bauble, the aforementioned Urza Saga, that's, 3 types right there, Instants, Unholy Heats, Tarfire, maybe not Tarfires in this deck, but it's pretty trivial to enable Delirium. You can do it for basically free. And if you have a good way to sort of mill over or discard Omniscience, you can just turn this into an Omniscience and, kind of figure it out from there. Sort of like the way that I kind of look at this is it's like a pseudo show and tell, where as opposed to having the Omniscience in your hand, you want it in the graveyard. And then you just shifting Woodland, make an Omniscience. And then the way that I envision these decks is I think they're going to be very similar to the way that they're built in Timeless, where you play Born Upon the Wind, Fae of Wishes for Approach of the Second Sun, so on and so forth. There is potential for this to be a little scary, depending on how easy it is to get Omniscience in the graveyard and how easy it is to do Delirium. Again, Delirium is easy. Omniscience in the graveyard, that one might be a little bit more difficult, but I'm sure we can figure it out. And yeah, I think this card is very, very good. Number 8. All right, coming in at number 7, we have Primal Prayers. I really wanted to put this a little bit higher, but I didn't quite know as far as the top 6 what to put it over. So yeah, this is the new Energy Allurin. I think this card is phenomenal, and it's going to open up a lot of combo potential. We talked about Guide of Souls earlier. It's very good with that. To where, like, what's so sick about Guide of Souls with it is, okay, so you play, like, turn 4, you have Primal Prayers. So let's say you have 2 energy, okay? Use 1 energy to cast Ranger Captain of Eos. 1 energy remaining. If you already have a Guide of Souls in play, you just basically get to cast your entire hand. And Ranger Captain is so good with prayers because it gets you more guides, but it also triggers off the guide. So if you have a guide in play, get an energy, get another guide, play guide, get another energy. Now you're generating energy. The easy combo kill, well, easy I should say, is this with Guide of Souls and Acerak, where you're playing the Acerak gate for free, gaining an energy, picking it back up, and doing the Dark Pool stuff. I'm sure there's other combos with this card, and again, very good with like Heliod plus Spike Feeder. Like imagine you just play Primal Prayers, you have Heliod Spike Feeder in your hand, you can just do it for free anytime at instant speed. You just Heliod combo if they go to tap out or something. A lot of potential with this card. One of my favorite cards in the set, and number 7 on the list. Number 6 on the list, Flare of Cultivation. This is part of the Flare cycle. Now, there are 2 Flares that I think are quite good. Spoiler alert. We may get to one in a little bit. But I like this one here at number 6. I don't know of a ton of applications outside of Yawgmoth because of Young Wolf, and then Amulet, or I guess Arboreal Grazer decks. But outside of Young Wolf and Arboreal Grazer, I'm not sure exactly what other non-token green creatures that are worth sacrificing to this. I'm sure that there are maybe there's something else out there that I'm missing, but very, very powerful in those decks. Like you can even imagine turn 1, Young Wolf, Flare, sack my Young Wolf, get a land. That's turn 2 Grist, make a token, and then you already have the Young Wolf and the Grist in play for a turn 3 Yawgmoth. There's just a lot of cool things and a lot of cool setup you can do with that. Very good, again, with Grazer, because it's basically a free body that you're getting a land off of, and then you have 4 mana on turn 2, because Grazer put a land into play, and very, very good card. I don't have a ton else to say about it. And now we finally get into our top 5. The first one that we are going to talk about here is Flare of Denial. This card is good, but it's weird, because in Merfolk specifically, I don't think this is as good as people think it is in that deck, because a lot of times with Merfolk, like if you are casting this for free, you're sacrificing probably a large creature, because the Merfolk deck is centered around playing Lords anyways. So you don't want to sacrifice a Lord to this. Ideally, you don't want to sacrifice like a 2/2 that, like a Harbinger or something like that that's locking a creature down, or the Rishadan Dockhand that's tapping their lands down. What I think this card is good with in Merfolk is Silvergill Adept, because Adept is the one card that replaces itself and is basically relatively free to sacrifice to this. I do think this will get people to start playing Adept again, and because I think they weren't. I don't know when the last time I looked at a modern Merfolk deck is, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think they were playing Adept, and I think this will get them to play Adept again. The other place that I really like this is in the Crabvine decks, because those decks have a natural 12 blue creatures with Hedron Crab, Narcomoeba, and Prized Amalgam, and those cards all basically come back for free, except for Crab, but you get your value out of Crab in the first 2 turns, so you don't mind sacrificing the Crab to the Flare. Past those applications, maybe there's some other ones, let me know in the comments, but those are the 2 that come to mind for me. The reason this card is so high is because if it is good, it is going to be absurdly good. It is going to be like, you know, Force of Will level, maybe not as good as Force of Will, but you get my point. If this card's good, it's going to be format warping, and that's why I have it as number 5. Okay, so this is actually kind of a top 21 because number 4 is a duo. So this is like 4A and 4B kind of thing. The real number 4 is Nadu Winged Wisdom, but I had to mention the counterpart to this, which is Springheart Nantuko. I'm more going to focus on Nadu and why I think this card is just completely bananas broken. This was, for those of you who don't know, this was my spoiler card. This is a card that was given to me by WotC, so thank you to WotC for giving me a spoiler card. The card that makes this so broken, the enabler for this is Shuko, which is a 1-mana equipment that you can equip creature gets +1/+0, and you can just equip it for 0. The reason this card is so good is it gives all of your creatures, whenever the creature becomes the target, reveal the top card. If it's a land, put it into the battlefield, otherwise put it into your hand. This ability only triggers twice each turn. A lot of people, when they read this card, they might think, oh, well, I can only do this twice per turn. No, it's twice per turn per creature. So if you have a way to landfall, like if you have a card that says landfall, make a 1/1, you see where I'm going with this. And that brings us to 4B or 4.2.5, or I don't know what the words we're going to call this, but Springheart Nantuko. So this is a 2-mana 1/1. It has Bestow. Bestow's probably not going to come up too much with this card. The only thing that matters is this is a 2-mana 1/1 that says landfall, you make a 1/1. That is most of the time what matters about this card. So you can imagine a scenario where you have both of these in play. Maybe you play the Nantuko on 2, maybe you play Nadu on 3. You have a Shuko. You go Shuko onto your Nantuko, hit a land off Nadu, play land, make a 1/1. Shuko, now the 1/1 that you just made off of Nantuko now has 2 instances of Nadu's ability, because every new token gets the ability this triggers twice each turn. As long as you can kind of keep hitting lands off of Nadu, you can just generate more tokens. Even if you just have Nadu and Shuko, that's it. The rules are such that you can actually Shuko, even if you have only one creature, you can Shuko onto the same creature, so you can still trigger Nadu twice per turn, even if you have no other creatures, even if you have nothing else going on. It's just, that would make Shuko a 0-mana draw 2 cards, or, you know, maybe hit a land, maybe hit a card. I don't really think enough people are talking about this card, and I think this is potentially one of the most broken cards in the set, and I'm very happy that WotC gave me this as a preview card, because that's going to look good on me. Just kidding. But yeah, I think this card is fantastic. I'm going to be playing a lot of Nadu decks, so expect to see that on the channel in just a little bit. Number 3 on the list, this is another card that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, Ugin's Binding. I am just in love with this card. The awkward part about this card is you might think to yourself, oh, well, you have to cast it before in order to get the second half, right? This is the 3-mana, return a non-land permanent, and when you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, exile from your graveyard to just Cyclonic Rift your opponent for free. The Cyclonic Rift your opponent for free part, extremely powerful, because you can combine that with Mirror Enforcer, Sojourner's Companion, and Frogmere Enforcer. We have 12 ways to trigger this for free outside of the graveyard. The key to unlocking the true brokenness of this card is Urza Saga for Underworld Cookbook. The Affinity decks already want to play Saga. Putting 1 cookbook into your deck lets you have essentially 4 copies for free, because you already want Saga. You can imagine maybe like turn 1, Urza Saga, turn 2, put some artifacts into play, turn 3, float mana, go get my cookbook, discard this, play Mirror Enforcer, bounce your whole board. I just, like, that, if that doesn't sound good to you, I don't really know what else to tell you. Just returning all of your opponent's non-land permanents just by casting your free Mirror Enforcer, that sounds completely absurd to me. Maybe I'm overrating this card, and maybe I'm a little too high on it, but I don't know, just the ability to do that basically at will with cards that you would just want to play anyways. I guess the exception is 3-mana Boomerang, but you can avoid that by just playing the cookbook. I don't know what else to say about this card. I find it very, very powerful in those affinity shells. I would not be surprised if this card was, you know, completely broken. But yeah, that's my number 3. I don't know what else to say about it, but let me know what you guys think about Ugin's Binding down below. All right, we only have 2 more. We are down to number 2. This is Necrodominance. This is the new kind of sort of Necropotence-esque. This is the callback to Necropotence. I maybe have this a little too high, but I'm kind of more... This is more of a safety valve than anything, where I think this has the potential to be broken. and I want to make sure that I have it high on my list just in case it is broken. On a more serious note, I think this card is very, very good in Scam. I don't know, that's kind of the weird question that I've kind of been asking myself over the past couple of days is this a better draw engine than the One Ring? I think it's better in the sense of you get the cards all up front as opposed to having to wait an extra couple of turns to get the cards off the ring. That interests me a little bit, and very, very good with if you maybe you scam a Grief on turn 1 and your opponent's really low on resources, slam this on 3, or maybe wait till turn 4 where you can go end of your turn, like leave a mana up with Necro in play, draw 15 cards, use the black mana, march, and then not have to worry about discarding the hand size because you're pitching all of your extra cards to march anyways. Yeah, I don't know. I think this has the potential to be extremely broken. I don't know what shells it necessarily goes right into yet, but I wanna hedge my bets a little bit and put this as number 2. Not quite as good as number 1, which I think if you've read the spoiler and you know what cards are in the set, you probably have figured it out by now. But let's get into it. Number 1, very easily, just very clearly, Ugin's Labyrinth. I saw this card relatively early on. I think it was like one of the first spoilers that came out. And to be quite honest with you, I still can't believe they printed this card. What were they thinking? They're just giving us a soul land, and they also gave us Devourer to help find the extra soul land. I really, really do think that we are going to be in Eldrazi summer, not too long. There's some backstops against Eldrazi where, again, Ugin's Labyrinth is sort of, I guess, balanced around the fact that it's more restrictive and you need a 7-drop in your hand and it's more deck building restrictions, but you do not realize the lengths that people will go to put an Ancient Tomb or a Soul Land into their deck. They will do literally anything. And if that has to include putting some more 7-drops in, so be it. I'll play 10 7-drops. I don't care. Especially the one that lets me look at 4 cards. Devourer of Destiny is kind of just a free roll with this card. But yeah, I mean, this card enables turn 2 Thought-Knot Seer. It enables turn 2 Matter Reshaper. Clearly the reason why it's so broken, Matter Reshaper, obviously. Yeah, I think we're going to be living in Eldrazi summer, so I hope you guys are, I hope you all enjoy playing against Eldrazi, because we are going to have to welcome our tentacle friends back to the format. And with all of that said, that was our top 20. I would say more about Ugin's Labyrinth, but I really think that enough has been said about it that I don't need to discuss more. But let me know what you guys think. I know this was a really long video. My editor's going to have a field day cutting this one. But let me know what your favorite card in the set is down below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the set. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.